To start things off, I'll create a new layer and we will label this Chrome. So we will dedicate this layer to shading the arm. And what I'll do is I'll actually grab the colors of the arm and make that a clipping mask for this layer because I don't need it to go past the arm. This is the only material that is chrome finish. There's some other metallic pieces, but they won't really need to be as reflective as the arm itself. So I had a different color for the arm compared to everything else. So what I do is I go to select color gamut, and then I will select the arm here. So everything that's that color in this frame, in this image, will be selected. So I hit OK, and then I go to the Chrome layer and I'll click Create Layer Mask. So now I have a clipping mask that is just for the arm. Well, I click this icon right here, the fill tool, then you'll see that it only filled in that arm. Now that I have everything selected, I can kind of just start painting right away. I like to use oil paint flat brush when I'm doing a rough pass of shading. We can actually fill in this entire layer with blue because I intend for the setting to be daytime, and so we'll go for like a sky color somewhere around here and then fill this entire layer. So we can use this as maybe the ground color, and because the arm is wrapping around, you will end up seeing a bit of the road on the very edge of this arm, kind of like this. With chrome or anything with a mirror finish, depending on the shape of it, it kind of rebounds to the color before it. So like you'll go from the sky color, then it's reflecting the bottom, then it's reflecting the top again, and then you'll kind of have this like this shape right here. This will also reflect a little bit of the road here. So that's kind of the mindset I have, is like reflect everything around the arm. Here I'll have it darker as well. If this was the highway in the film, it's the road, and then it's the barrier, and then some lights. There's not a lot to reflect off of. If you look at the arm, you can see that it's just road, some clouds, the sun, and that's it. If you're thinking about making the background simpler, then rendering the chrome will be simpler. Here you can add some green because of the jacket, so it will reflect a bit of the green because it's nearby. Always keep in mind of the form of your subject. You know, like if you know that this part here curves a bit more due to the anatomy of the arm, and you need to take that into consideration when shading it, because in real life those little divots and curves and valleys, they have an effect on how things are reflected. Now for the forearm, there is a little divot right here, but the reason why I haven't shaded it in yet is because it's not going far down enough from the sky's angle for it to change color. It wouldn't show any of the street because it's not pointing towards the street. So to show the form of that, you would probably need something in the sky to help make that shape out. For example, the sunlight is coming in from up there. So what you would need to do is something like this, where, okay, now you know the sun is here, so you can make an indication that, okay, here's the light source for it. And because the forearm is like an elongated muscle group, you can kind of stretch out the sun like that. Shapes on a chrome material will be distorted depending on how that material is formed. And then here, the form is not as long as the forearm, but it still gets elongated, so you distort it to follow that shape. And then here, you can kind of do this number right here. So it really is getting familiar with how the figure is shaped and kind of getting used to how reflections will be distorted based off of the shape. Honestly, I'm still just kind of winging it. I don't know if this is exactly how it would look, but I know that it's close enough to where I go, okay, that feels natural. That feels like how that would reflect in real life. And because this shape here is more spherical, so too is the reflection. So if you want, you can add more details to the sky. Typically, clouds that are in the air. Here I'm kind of throwing the shapes of the clouds out first, and then if I'm satisfied with the shape and I think that the volume of the cloud would be heavy enough, then I'll add darker values to it. If you do something here, then the other reflections, the other parts of the chrome should match, because the environment doesn't change. The environment is consistent. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you add a detail here, that detail should also be around here somewhere. So if you make something super complex, just keep in mind you'll have to do it to some extent. You can kind of cheat it. You don't have to follow it exactly, but just kind of make a representation of, okay, this is also here. So the sky usually isn't this flat. If you ever look at the horizon, you'll notice that the sky is a little bit brighter than if you were to look at the sky straight up. Because of that, the sky is never this flat. So what you would need to do is anywhere that's not the horizon, you can make a little darker, or you can go the opposite direction and make everything on the edge brighter. So like, since I'm already kind of using white right now, I can go in here and brighten up the edges like this. So it's kind of taking shape. Like once you add that subtle gradient for the sky, it starts to look more and more like a reflection. Here you can darken the sky a little bit next to the sun. Because now we have a more varied display of color for the sky, now you can kind of take advantage of some of these shapes that we weren't able to get to with the darker shading, and that can help us a lot with making sure the form is easy to read. So like, for example, here, it'll be darker because this is kind of the top of the sky, but then the reflection kind of moves a little bit further down. So now you can kind of create this gradient here. And if the reflections get a little bit too tight in their linear, like you see how here it's kind of a little busy, you can always just blend it back out. Now here, I kind of want to distort this a little bit more because the forearm doesn't go straight down like that. I know it's a metal arm, so it doesn't have to follow conventional anatomy, but it looks cooler when it does, to me at least. So I'm going to push this a little bit to the left, make it curve more, because there is another smaller muscle group here. I can add another sun reflection there. Okay. So as you can see, it's starting to take more shape. You can add some other things, like for example, this little pocket right here, it might be visible on the reflection ever so slightly, like that. Little details like that help make the chrome look more realistic, so you can add those if you would like. That's why it's always a good idea to have the environment in mind. If there's cars near him, then there might be some red that pops up on his arm, the rear lights. This is all just to kind of help vary the colors that the chrome would catch, just so that it doesn't look so simple. It's more intriguing to look at. So these little details here, these lines, these are what they're called parting lines. So parting lines means that there is a division between two surfaces. So to help create more of the chrome effect, you would need to emphasize that this is in fact a parting line. So I have the line art for it, but now I need the chrome to also represent that line right there. Like, this is not just a line, this is a shape. So it curves in to that divot. Like, imagine this as a valley or a trench where the surface goes flat and then it dips in. And because of that, the reflection also has to distort and curve along with it. And usually the easiest way to do that is just that, like just adding a line to indicate, okay, this is where the reflection starts to distort more. And because the sun is up here, that means every time that the chrome surface curves, it's going to see the sun. So because it sees the sun, the easiest way to create that lip is just adding white, because the sun is there. So it makes sense to just highlight it that way. So you see, like, that small detail, that little refinement of the shape helps make the form more 3D. It makes those details pop out a lot more, and it makes it feel more realistic. So little things like that, just keep in mind. And notice how when I do these lines, I'm only doing it one direction. What I like to do is I always try to make sure the highlight is in the same direction as the light source. So you see the sun is here, so that means it should follow the direction of the sun. because if you do it the opposite direction, it will look weird. It won't feel right. It feels like the shape of it is popping off the arm, but that's not what's happening. That plate of his arm isn't popping away from him, it's going into the arm. So when you do this, it indicates that the sun or the shape is going out like this, when in reality the shape is going into the valley. So that's why you always highlight it on the opposite side. Here, you kind of have to do it this way because the sun now is kind of going like here. You always point it towards the light source. So now you can kind of do this and it'll still work. It won't feel like it's popping off anymore. Just practicing that technique, you'll get the hang of it and kind of see why it works and why it might not. Now, obviously, this is for the sake of the tutorial, but I would refine this more. I would, make everything more blended out and make sure all the brushstrokes are where I need them to be. But let's say you were satisfied with this rendering right here. Another thing you could do is, for detail purposes, you can add little scratches, smudges, and things, because technically speaking, the Winter Soldier's arm probably wouldn't be perfectly reflective. Probably have some scratches just from wear and tear, all the missions he's done, all the battles he's been a part of. Eventually the arm does get scratched up. So you can add these little lines. It's better to have these lines pop up more prominently near the highlights on the arm, because that's where the light is bouncing off the most. So you're going to see the scratches more prominently around it. So you can kind of do this number where the scratches almost orbit the light source like that. And it creates this really cool, like, scratched metal effect. Try not to get too carried away with this little detail with the scratched lines, because if you do too much of it, it just kind of looks a little busy. But it does help if you put it near the areas where it's highlighted. What you can also do is create kind of this blurry, diffused reflection. You would hit a new layer, go to the chrome layer, click the mask itself, make sure the mask is highlighted, control, and click it. So now you have it as a selection again. You hit create layer mask on the top layer. Now that one also has the same as that one, or you could do a transparency lock, clip to layer below. We're going to grab a softer brush, shadow brush, in the airbrush section, and then we will brush over the areas where there's sunlight, like where it's hitting the surface of the arm. Everywhere where the sun is, you just highlight it. You could probably do ambient occlusion because, like I said, it's not a perfect mirror. If you were to turn off your chrome layer, you can kind of see that there's subtle highlights. We'll label this highlight. You can see where we brushed those bloom effect highlights. If we go to this bottom layer here, the flats, if we hit new layer, we make it clip to layer below and set it to multiply. If we grab like a blue or something of the similar color for the background and just paint at these darker edges, kind of create this ambient occlusion effect, which will help kind of bring the arm into form. It doesn't have to be super prominent, it just has to be subtle enough that it implies that this is a 3D shape. We can grab this pen tool, maybe add some shadows underneath these little concave sections of the arm, just to make it easier to read, like, okay, this is definitely a part of the arm that goes a little lower in depth compared to everything else. So again, these are all it's kind of a rough take as to how I would approach it, but this is more or less how things would go down. Once you do that, you can turn this back on. We can actually move this multiply layer above the chrome layer so we can actually see our work. So you'll see how, all the work we did with the ambient occlusion is visible. There's areas where it's darker in shading. These places are more refined now. These little divots, they're accented more, so now it has more depth on the actual texture of the arm. But that's kind of how my approach is when I do chrome rendering. During the refinement stage, I like to use this brush, the gouache brush, but conveniently enough, this brush is actually super useful for this material, this metal, because you can kind of create the brushed metal look like this, and that can be super useful. If you want the color of the chrome material to pop out more, you copy the flats layer, and maybe you just only want to copy the arm part. Grab this flats layer, hit Control C, click the layer above, and then Control V. That's another way to duplicate a layer. And you'll see that the flats are over the chrome. What we can do is just hit clip to layer below. And so now it only is covering the chrome part. Set the layer blend mode to color. So you see, like, if I change it to completely 100% color, it gets rid of all of the colors that we had before, but it still has the values. So if you want that look, you can go for that as well. But if you want something in between, you can kind of mess around with the opacity and see where you like it to be placed. Honestly, if you want a warmer sunlight, you could go to the layer where we had the bloom effect. We can go and actually make that yellow. Go to layer color, and you'll see here that there's two options, layer color, and you got the subcolor here. So if you select layer color, and we'll go with, I don't know, like a white. Actually, we'll just go over to just yellow. We can make them both yellow, and we'll see how that looks. So make them both yellow. So you'll see that it's taken effect. It's all yellow now. And what we do is set it to screen. So now there's this warm sunlight effect going on. So if you want to add more color to the chrome, just make it have a more realistic look, you can do that as well. Or you can start from the jump and make it yellow, you know, just have it in the gradation or the reflection itself. It's up to you. There's multiple ways to do this. And that's the beauty of art. After refining the lighting for the arm and also completing the rest of the piece, this was the end result from my Winter Soldier drawing. I hope this video was useful for you all. If you have any questions, please let me know, and thank you for your time.